Hey everybody, and welcome to rabb1t's Ramblings, podcast 425. This time I have a little bit to say about Doom the Dark Ages, and that's all I have for this time. Hopefully, you'll enjoy the show. So I listened to a few reviews about Doom the Dark Ages, and the reviewers tend to pretty much always say it took about 15 to 20 hours for them to complete. So I decided instead of waiting for some kind of sale to get it, I would just do a month of Game Pass and play it on there, because it's been a very long time since I played a Doom game where I continued past finishing it the first time, and so I figured if I'm only going to play it once and it's only going to be 15 to 20 hours, I'll just do it on Game Pass. And so I did, but it did take a bit longer than their estimate. I would probably guess, since it doesn't seem to keep track of how long you played, that I played for probably closer to 25, maybe even 30 hours. I don't know why it seemed to take me much longer. Again, it doesn't keep track of my hours, so I could just be overestimating and wrong. But it did feel like quite a bit longer than 15 hours for sure to finish. I played the first few chapters on the third hardest difficulty, but then I pretty quickly turned it down to the second difficulty, which is the sort of default setting, because I discovered on the third difficulty it ramped up enemy damage to 200%, which is like really stupid. So turning it down to the second difficulty put everything back to 100%, and that seemed much more reasonable to me. What was probably the biggest issue for me with taking that much damage was something that actually I recall coming up with the previous game, Doom Eternal, and I remember that just being frustrating as hell in Doom Eternal, and that is there really isn't any kind of indicator that you're taking damage. I don't know why, but there are barely any sort of grunt noises, as most people would refer to them, you know, the when you're getting hit. There's almost none of that. There is even a setting to turn it off completely, which I don't know why you would do that, since it's barely happening anyways. But on that setting where you could take 200% damage, you could very easily die and just have no idea you were hurt, let alone so close to death. Because there is a warning for being very low life. You know, it does the, red outline on the edge of the screen, and there's the heartbeat sound. But as far as I can tell, that's around 10%. And when you are that low and you're taking, big damage, you could very easily be effectively one-shot if you aren't paying attention to your health. Especially when you're at that higher setting and taking 200% damage or more on the higher settings. And it's just like I did not want to play a Souls-like Doom game. Maybe later on when I had more health and I knew sort of what was going on and I was paying more attention to my health meter, I probably could have turned it back up. But at that point I just didn't really see any point to it because there weren't better rewards for setting it higher. So outside of the personal challenge of saying, oh, I did the harder setting, I just saw no point for it. Music will be the biggest change because their composer that has always done the music for them in the past is no longer with them. They had a big disagreement. It was in the news. You can look up what happened there. So the music is okay. In some parts it's pretty good, but in most parts I would just call it adequate for a modern game. One big change that I kind of didn't like was it seems sort of like they took lore to the extreme, and while it was almost absent in the previous games, This is like the complete flipped over opposite of that. It's too much. There are, I think, 22 chapters, and in each chapter, it starts off with pretty much a short cutscene of a bunch of lore and story, and then there will sometimes even be cutscenes in the middle of the chapter. So there is a lot. It kind of feels like if there was an 80s cartoon company and they said, "Oh, we would like to make a video game. Hey, id Software, can we make a Doom game?" And they sat down and explained, what a Doom game consisted of. And then they're like, "Okay, we'll do our take on a Doom game, but put in this 80s style cartoon in front of it." That kind of feels like what happened. It's not, cartoon, it's done in-game engine, and you just go right from the cutscene into the action. So it does look really good because it is, the actual game assets, but it's a lot. I always wanted more story, but this is too much story. Granted, it does expand on the lore they have been using, so it's not really wrong in any way. It's just really extreme compared to how much there has been before. The other big change, which probably everybody knows about, is how now it's got this rhythm element where you want to block the green attacks with your shield. And in that sense, I kind of refer to the game as Doom Revolution, because when there's a lot of bad guys around you who do the special attacks, you're spending far more time doing rhythm, block, melee, block, melee, block. And it gets just into this really repetitive pattern, which granted in some ways, once you get into that groove, it's kind of cool to do that. And kudos to them for making a game that is so different than the other games. But I don't know, it kind of made me feel like I'm not playing Doom, and I'm playing just this rhythm game. And it didn't feel as Doom, which is very weird to think of. It was enjoyable, taken on its own. It is a thing I did have a good time with for this game, but I don't know that I would want to see it carried over to the next game, if that makes any sense. But in a strange way, that sort of helped set the pacing in what I would call the most original Doom-like pacing, in terms of you're going through this part really fast and then you're kind of slowing down to fight the big bosses. And so in that aspect, it's really cool. Also, this game does probably have the biggest, by far, zones that you're playing in. Each chapter is kind of its own little zone area. Sometimes it will have even more than one zone area, but these are really massive areas that are sometimes very cool. There was one that was sort of like a big, massive downed pirate ship area, and these were massive pirate ships, like ones that like Titans would be on, so you felt really small on these really massive ships, and you'd spend all this time going through one, and then you'd get to another one. And on this one chapter, I think you go through like 3 of these really massive ships, and it's actually really kind of cool. So there are some level design aspects that I will probably remember fondly for a while. And overall, in the game, I had a really good time. It was a really good Doom game. Like I said, I have really kind of no desire at all to play through it again. But I don't know. I had a very good time with it. I would definitely recommend it on Game Pass. Because it is so short, I don't know. I would only recommend it maybe on sale. Or if you are a super, super huge Doom fan and you're like, oh my god, I got 100% everything, and then I got to play it on the harder settings, maybe then go ahead and pay, a higher price. I did really enjoy how they hid the stuff in the levels. I'm one who tends to play sort of more old school. I will not bring up the map unless I absolutely need to. And so I do appreciate that I found a decent number of secrets. I would guess probably found around 70% total secrets. If we're considering collectibles, probably only maybe like 30%. Those are much tougher to find for some reason. But I did like how I would sometimes see a secret and it'd be like, how do I get there? Maybe if I go this way, or I look over here, I look over there, there's a special thing to grapple on, or there's a special thing to drop down to, and then that was very cool, because I remember in Eternal, they weren't as easy to find. You pretty much had to look at the map, which, like I said, that's kind of very disappointing to me. I don't tend to like to do that. But I don't know. I suppose overall, I would say level design is probably excellent because it is big. They have varying areas where sometimes you're in a corridor, but it's usually pretty rare. Usually there's different areas you can sort of weave your way around. It's probably the most sort of open world it's been in a while. There are, certain areas you have to go from point A to point B to point C. Sometimes they're even locked between areas by keys. So some aspects are somewhat linear, but it does feel like there's a lot of room to sort of run over here and run over there and, tackle this battle, however you want. The weapons are really good, but they are also what you expect for the game. There wasn't really anything that surprised me, I don't think. I think the only one I can think of is there's a sort of grenade launcher, which I don't recall being in the previous games. And of course the melee weapons are new and the shield is new. But outside of that, I'm pretty sure they were all the same weapons from the previous games, which we all pretty much knew to expect. There are also new sort of play styles where you're fighting in a Titan mech and you're flying around on a dragon. Those are pretty forgettable to me. I mean, I get that they're trying to do something different this time, but I don't know if they were really necessary or super fun. They were kind of interesting, but they felt the most rhythm of the rhythm game aspects of Dark Age. So, I don't know. They were different, and I applaud them for trying something different, but I don't know. All of these differences, I don't know. It's good for this game, but I don't know, like I said, that I would prefer to see it again. I would rather go back to Eternal's way of dodging, which I believe was their mechanic to sort of get out of the way of damage. And I don't know, part of it might be also because I'm getting old, and that's a hell of a lot of buttons to remember to push, to do the melee, to do the shield block, to do the special timing, and then you're trying to time stuff to block and be defensive and watch out for the defensive thing, but also do the shooting, and I don't know, sometimes it felt overwhelming. I did enjoy it a lot more in the second half of the game when I got used to it. But on that same vein, somebody who only plays an hour or two a week, I don't know if it's going to be all that easy to remember all those buttons and be as into the timing aspects of it. But I suppose you could always turn it down. In difficulty, there are a bunch of different settings you can turn down individually, and then, sort of fine-tune it to your style, which is brand new for the series, which I am happy about. I didn't use any of those features, but I'm glad they are there. And I guess that's it. Like I said, I would recommend it on Game Pass for sure, maybe on sale price, but I would only recommend higher than sale price if you are super into the Doom franchise, in which case you've probably already been playing and don't need to hear me ramble about it. But I guess that's it for this time. And that's all for this time. I don't know what I'll talk about for next time. I have moved on from Doom to Clair Obscura Expedition 33. I'm checking that out. So far, I've only played, I think, about 3 or 4 hours. It is very JRPG at its core, which I'm not that into. So I turned it down to story mode difficulty, and it's been a lot better. But I still think it's going to be very long because there are times where I'm running around areas and the areas are just massive, or I'll get lost. Like the other night, I spent like an hour pretty much running in circles, fighting the same guys over and over because I couldn't figure out where I was going. So I don't know. Maybe I'll talk about that next time, probably very briefly at the least. But for the main bulk of what I'll talk about next time, I don't know. I think the next Destiny sort of saga will begin mid-July, so I think that will be 2 podcasts from now. I don't think the next podcast will be after that. So I don't know. I'll probably talk about that, in 2 podcasts. But I don't know for sure what I'll talk about next time. But hopefully, I'll see everybody then. Okay, thanks, bye.
You have been listening to Rabbit's Ramblings. If you would like to see the show notes or feed the bunny by sending a donation, you can find the show website at www.rabbit.com/podcast/rabbitsramblings.html. When you type Rabbit's Ramblings, don't use a space. If you would like to send me an email, you can do so at rabbit@rabbit.com. If you like my page, you can also post on Facebook at rabb1t's. You can follow me on YouTube at rabb1t's. I have a page on Patreon at www.patreon.com/rabbit, RABB1T. You can set up a monthly recurring subscription there at a price point of your choice. Be sure to put the number 1 in place of I anytime you type rabbit.
Rabbit's Ramblings is copyright Eric Stryker, using a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Derivatives License 2025.